February 24th, 1992, Waikiki Beach, Hawaii. Kurt Cobain was about to marry Courtney Love when he suddenly asked the officiant to wait. In front of their few witnesses, Kurt did something nobody expected. He pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper and began reading. By the time he finished, even Courtney was crying. But what Kurt read that day on that beach wasn't what anyone thought it would be. It wasn't a love poem or song lyrics. It was something that would haunt everyone who heard it, because it revealed that Kurt Cobain knew exactly how his story would end, and he was marrying Courtney anyway. The wedding wasn't supposed to happen in Hawaii at all. Kurt and Courtney had been planning something bigger in Seattle, but 3 days earlier, Courtney had discovered she was pregnant. They'd flown to Hawaii on impulse, Kurt wearing a green flannel pajama top because he didn't own a suit, Courtney in a silk dress that had belonged to Frances Farmer, the tragic actress she'd been obsessed with since childhood. Only 8 people were on that beach. Dylan Carlson, Kurt's best friend and drug buddy, Janet Billig, Nirvana's publicist, a few close friends from the Seattle scene, and a non-denominational minister they'd found in the phone book that morning, who had no idea he was about to marry rock royalty. The ceremony was supposed to start at sunset, but Kurt was 3 hours late. He'd locked himself in the bathroom of their hotel room, and Courtney could hear him crying through the door. Not the quiet tears of wedding day nerves, but the deep body-shaking sobs of someone wrestling with a decision that would define the rest of their life. "Baby, please," Courtney had begged through the door. "If you don't want to do this, we don't have to. I'll understand." When Kurt finally emerged, his eyes were red and swollen, but he was carrying something, a crumpled piece of notebook paper covered in his distinctive handwriting. The same handwriting that would, just over 2 years later, fill his suicide note. "I'm ready," he told Courtney, "but I need to say something first." They made their way to the beach, where their small group of witnesses had been waiting in the humid Hawaiian evening. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed too boopy for what was about to happen. The minister, a kind man named David Reed, began the ceremony with the traditional words, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Kurt and Courtney." That's when Kurt raised his hand. "Wait," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. There's something I have to say first." The minister looked confused. Courtney looked worried. Dylan Carlson, who knew Kurt better than almost anyone, later said he thought Kurt was about to call off the wedding entirely. Kurt pulled out the piece of paper from his pajama pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. He looked at Courtney, then at the small group of witnesses, then back at the paper. "I wrote this last night," he began, his voice cracking. "I couldn't sleep and I kept thinking about what marriage means, what I'm promising, what I'm asking Courtney to accept." He cleared his throat and began to read. "I am not a good man," Kurt read, and Courtney immediately started crying. "I am selfish, self-destructive, and haunted by demons I can't name. I have tried to die more times than I've tried to live. My stomach hurts every single day, and I use heroin not to get high, but to stop feeling like my body is eating itself from the inside." The wedding party stood frozen. This wasn't a wedding vow. This was a confession. "I will disappoint you," Kurt continued reading, his voice stronger now. "I will make you cry. I will make you question why you chose me. I will probably die young and leave you to explain to our children why their father chose oblivion over them." Janet Billig later said she wanted to stop him, that this was too raw, too painful for a wedding, but nobody moved. Everyone seemed to understand they were witnessing something that needed to be said. "I am writing this at 3 a.m., Kurt continued, "watching you sleep, your hand on your belly where our baby is growing, and I am terrified. Not of being a father, but of being the kind of father mine was. Absent, angry, gone." Courtney was sobbing now, but she didn't try to stop him. She knew Kurt needed to say this, needed to confess his fears before he could promise anything. "But here's what else I know," Kurt read, and for the first time since he started, he looked up from the paper directly at Courtney. "I know that you see all of this. and love me anyway. I know that when I'm drowning in my own darkness, you jump in after me, even though you can barely swim yourself. I know that our love is not healthy or safe, or anything that love is supposed to be." He paused, taking a deep breath of the salt air. "But I also know that without you I would already be dead. And I know that the child we're going to have deserves a chance at life, even if their parents are disastrous. And I know that if I don't marry you today, right now, I'll lose the only person who makes me believe that broken things can still be beautiful." The beach was completely silent, except for the waves and Courtney's quiet sobs. "So this is my vow," Kurt said, folding up the paper and looking directly at Courtney. "I promise to try, not to succeed, because I can't promise that. Not to get better, because I might not. But to try to stay alive, to try to be present, to try to love you and our baby more than I hate myself. That's all I can promise, to try." What happened next was something none of the witnesses would ever forget. Courtney, mascara streaming down her face in black rivers, walked over to Kurt and took the paper from his hands. Then she did something that shocked him. She tore it up. "No," she said firmly, the pieces of paper falling like snow onto the sand. "No, baby. You don't get to write your own obituary at our wedding." Kurt looked stunned. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. "You want to know what you're promising?" Courtney said, her voice growing stronger. "You're promising to wake up next to me tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. You're not promising to try to stay alive. You're promising to fucking live." She grabbed his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "I'm not marrying you because you're broken," she said. "I'm marrying you because you're the only person I've ever met who's as broken as me and still manages to create beauty. Your pain made Nevermind. Your anger made Teen Spirit. Your fear is going to make you a father who understands what it's like to be scared and still show up." Dylan Carlson later said this was the moment when he saw Kurt change. Something in his posture shifted, like a weight had been lifted, or placed differently. "You don't have to be good," Courtney continued. "You don't have to be fixed. You just have to be here. Can you promise me that? Can you promise to just be here?" Kurt was crying now. Not the desperate tears from earlier, but something cleaner, clearer. "I can promise to be here today," he said quietly. "Then that's enough," Courtney said. "We'll worry about tomorrow when it comes." The minister, who had been standing in shocked silence, cleared his throat. Should I continue with the ceremony?" Kurt and Courtney both laughed, a broken, beautiful sound that cut through the tension. "Yeah," Kurt said, wiping his eyes, "but maybe skip the 'till death do us part' bit. We've covered that already." What followed was perhaps the most unconventional wedding ceremony ever performed on a Hawaiian beach. Instead of traditional vows, Kurt and Courtney made promises that were small, achievable, real. "I promise to make you laugh at least once a day," Courtney said. "I promise to write you songs even when I can't say the words out loud," Kurt replied. "I promise to not let you isolate yourself when the darkness comes. I promise to tell you when the darkness is coming, so you can prepare. I promise to believe in your recovery, even when you don't. I promise to want recovery, even when I don't believe in it." Back and forth they went, creating a marriage contract, built not on fairy tales, but on the reality of who they were. Two damaged people, choosing each other despite everything that said they shouldn't. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kurt kissed Courtney with a tenderness that surprised everyone who knew them as the volatile couple who fought as passionately as they loved. It was gentle, careful, like he was afraid she might disappear. "I want to live," Kurt whispered to Courtney, words that only she and the minister heard. "For the first time in my life, I want to live to see what happens next." The tragic irony, of course, is that Kurt would be dead in just over 2 years. But those who were on that beach in Hawaii insisted that the marriage, for all its dysfunction, gave Kurt 2 years he wouldn't have had otherwise. "People think Courtney was bad for Kurt," Janet Billig said years later. "But I was there. I saw him choose life that day, even after confessing he expected to die. She didn't let him romanticize his death. She made him promise to live, even if it was just one day at a time. Dylan Carlson, who would later be the one to buy the shotgun Kurt used to kill himself, reflected, "That moment on the beach, when he read that letter, it was Kurt trying to warn everyone. He was saying, 'This is who I am. This is how it ends.'" But Courtney refused to accept it. She fought for him until the very end. The wedding photos, taken by a friend with a disposable camera, show something remarkable. In every picture after the ceremony, Kurt is smiling, not the forced, uncomfortable smile he wore in most photographs, but something genuine. He looks like someone who has just confessed to a crime and been forgiven. Francis Bean Cobain, the child Courtney was carrying that day, would later say, "My parents' wedding wasn't a fairy tale. It was two people acknowledging how damaged they were and choosing to love no other anyway." That's more honest than most weddings. The piece of paper that Kurt read from, the one Courtney tore up, was partially recovered from the beach the next day by a hotel worker. Only fragments remained, but one piece contained a line that wasn't read aloud at the ceremony. "If love could cure addiction, you would have saved me already. But love can't cure addiction. It can only make the dying more bearable." Michael Azarad, who would later write the definitive Nirvana biography, interviewed Kurt about the wedding. Kurt's description was characteristically cryptic, but revealing. "I basically told everyone at my wedding that I is going to die young and disappoint them, and Courtney said, 'Yeah, probably, but let's get married anyway.' That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." The minister, David Reed, broke his professional silence only once, in 2004, 10 years after Kurt's death. "I've performed hundreds of weddings," he said, "but I've never seen anything like that one." The groom essentially read his own suicide note as his wedding vow, and the bride's response was to choose him anyway. "It was the saddest and most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed." Those 8 people on that beach in Hawaii witnessed something that would define the mythology of Kurt and Courtney forever. Not the fairy tale wedding of rock royalty, but something far more complex. 2 people looking directly at the darkness ahead and walking into it together. The wedding certificate, signed on February 24, 1992, sits in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now. But what's not in any museum, what lives only in the memory of those who were there, is the sound of Kurt Cobain's voice breaking as he promised to try to stay alive, and Courtney Love telling him that trying was enough. 3 hours after the ceremony, Kurt used heroin in their honeymoon suite. Courtney didn't leave. She didn't rage. She simply held him and whispered, "Tomorrow, you promised to be here tomorrow." And for 770 tomorrows, he kept that promise, until April 5, 1994, when tomorrow became too heavy to carry. But on that beach in Hawaii, with the sun setting and the waves crashing, and a small group of friends bearing witness, Kurt Cobain did something braver than dying young. He admitted he probably would die young, and then chose to live anyway for as long as he could, with the only person who made living seem possible. The wrinkled piece of paper he read from was never fully recovered. But Courtney, in a 2015 interview, revealed she had memorized the last line, the one Kurt didn't read aloud. "If I could promise you forever, I would. But all I have is today. So today, in front of God and these witnesses and the ghost of Francis Farmer, I choose you. Tomorrow, if I'm still here, I'll choose you again." That's what Kurt Cobain stopped his wedding to say. Not a promise of forever, but a promise of today. And for someone who had been planning his death since he was 15, that was everything.